Thanks for leading us. I don't know, do you do it all together, or are you normally separate and you just brought it together for this? You did that. Well, you all did wonderful. Mr. President, you did great too. Um, it was it was good. It was good. Well, hope you've had a great day here at Harvey Cedars out at the beach. I saw some of you. You saw me? Okay. It's a good nap taking place. I saw someone fall asleep. I didn't know if it was in our group, but he looked dead. And I almost went and thought, I wonder if we should wake him up when the tide comes in, because he's going to be surprised in just a few minutes. I didn't, but I assume someone did. And then, I had to do the dad thing. It's always nice when you can kind of prepare your thoughts. And when you can come in here and you're ready, you've prayed a little bit, and you're ready to go. I didn't have that opportunity because my son said that the toilet was plugged up, and so I had to do a little bit of the dad thing. But you got some awesome plungers here. I've never used one of those crinkly kind, that it's like super suction kind. I'm never going back. I'm never going back to the old brown one on the handle thing, because that worked great. And then this afternoon, we went to the Pelican Snow Cone place. Pelican Snowballs or whatever it's called. It was awesome. If you've not been there, it's just right down the main strip there where the 5 and 10 the big gift shop is. Just beyond that. It's just beyond that. It was awesome. So it's been a good day. It's been a good day. Okay, so we're going to do something. I'm entering this evening with some fear and trepidation because, you should always, they taught us in seminary, when you know your audience, make sure you're speaking to the right people. And kind of when I was preparing, I was getting ready, I was picturing family camp with a lot of little kids. Not that you're not in that age group right now, but some of you aren't, and you know it. And so I was thinking about this, and I thought, this is what I was going to talk on, and I think I'm just going to stick to my guns, because it's still a huge area or issue among us all, and that's technology. And what we're going to do is and I was thinking about this earlier, John, you sit in every single chapel session. I know a lot, because I speak at a lot of camps, a lot of the guys go, here he is, and then they just walk right out the back door, and they don't hang around. But you're at every single one. Is that your practice? Or is this your nap taking place? Or what is... Okay. What heresies are spoken. Well, I'm hoping you'll get called out of this one. But you know what? You're going to find a passage in the scripture that I believe refers to not technology, but the heinous behind it sometimes. Because I get lots of emails. I get them from dads, I get them from moms, I get them from grandparents, I talk to you out there. And this thing... maybe the biggest thing that I am asked is, what do I do about my son or my daughter who I can't pull them away from it anymore? But it's not just about sons and daughters. Sometimes I have wives who say, my husband won't stop playing those games. And I'm having wives who are or husbands who are telling me, my wife is always on her phone. Some of you're getting guilty already. Your husband did not say this to me. Okay, I'm letting you know right now. And just so before we dive into Scripture, and I know you're all wondering, is that in the New Testament or the Old Testament? It is in the Old Testament. But and I'm not an anti-technology guy. We all, we use technology to do whatever we do. I can't even imagine not doing it. Driving here without a GPS. I can't imagine what I'd do without a GPS. In fact, I remember the very first time, and this is kind of a bittersweet story, the very first time I was ever exposed to entertainment technology. because back in the day, we didn't have entertainment technology. We had entertainment and no technology. And I can remember I was in North Carolina visiting my cousins, Brian and Scott. And at some point during the hot summer day, my cousin Scott said, "Hey, would you like to play something on television?" Now, I have never played anything on television at the time. Television was only for watching things. And so I'm like, sure, I'm up for it. So we went inside in front of his giant, console television that took up, it looked like a chest freezer, and sat down on his carpet, a shag carpet, and he pulls out this box. Had never even seen a VCR before, but it was about that size, and he hands me this little thing that I didn't know was a controller at the time, but it was. Had a little knob on top, and he turns on the television, and of course, it's not like today where it goes bloop. It goes, oh. It takes a while before it turns on. And right down the center of this television was a dotted line. On one side, there was a rectangle. On the other side was another rectangle, and there was this ball that was actually square that was bouncing back and forth. And it made that very familiar sound. Boom, 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 boom. And it looked just like ping pong. And it was called Pong. It was very realistic. And so we played it for a little while, and then we turned it off, and we went back to playing. And I never even really saw anything, probably for a little while after that. And then one Christmas, Sean McIntyre, he just died yesterday. And my mom texted me, and Sean was just the smiliest guy you could ever know, and he was a believer. But it's just kind of a sad story. But Sean McIntyre called my brothers and said, "Hey, I got this really cool gift for Christmas, and you guys got to come up and see it." And so we all piled into my dad's car, and I don't know if it was Christmas morning or the day after, and we drove up, and he got this thing called an Atari. I had never seen an Atari before, but he turned on the screen, and these little aliens do jumping jacks right across the screen, and it was like amazing. My personal favorite was Asteroids. Do you remember that game? I remember when we started traveling in our RV, I thought, oh, maybe the kids would like one of those Atari joysticks that games come right in them, and I got it, and they didn't care at all about it. But I can remember them trying to get a whole hang of it, and they're looking on television, doing that thing, and they're playing Asteroids, and my kids are like, "Dad, we can't figure this out." And I'm like, "I can do it." So I get down and I play the Asteroids, and they're like, "Ted, you are awesome at this." And I'm like, "I know." And then I guess somewhere I just fell asleep. And I didn't think much more about technology. I went to college. I got married, and we started having children. I was a pastor at a church. And then I started noticing all these little kids, in the before and after hours, they had these little boxes in their hands. And they're playing these games. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. And of course, I was self-righteous, and I'm like, I'd never let my kids play those kind of games. We're going to spend our days reaching the poor and things like that, And, but someone introduced us to educational video games. And it was amazing. It was like, it was Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Pots, and you could take your little cursor and put it right over a honey pot, and it would say red, and it would count for you, and you put it on Tigger, and he'd go, hoo-hoo-hoo, and do his little thing, and that's about as good as it gets here, right here. And then we went to other games like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, where you learn geography, and then we did the Oregon Trail. I don't know if any of you remember that one. And it was like a real person was right. I felt like my grandpa, like, how did he get in there? And he was talking to me, and he'd say, "Welcome, folks, and to the Oregon Trail." And you do these things, and so we were doing that kind of thing. And then my wife said to me, she said, "Todd, do you think that it's getting kind of quiet in our house? It's like that's all our kids want to do." And I'm like, "It's perfect. Yes, it's great. Win-win." And she's like, "I don't know." And then I noticed that I started hearing a tone change in their voices. They started complaining more. Like, "Oh, that's not fair. I didn't get my turn. It was my turn, and he got 2 turns, and I only got 1 turn." or they'd start lying. I'd see them sitting in front of the screen, and they weren't supposed to be sitting in the front of the screen. I'm like, what are you doing? They say, oh, nothing. I'm like, well, you got the game on. You're not supposed to be playing it. I'm not playing it. I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, I'm seeing how it works. I'm like, well, that's kind of like playing it, And I felt like a little beast had invaded our home, and I called it the techno beast. And that's when everything began to change for me, because I got this email from a dad, and he wrote that he was struggling with being addicted to video games, and he said even his daughter was. And this just kind of blew me out of the water. But here's his email. It's a long one, but it's right in the middle. He says, addiction to video games could hit in any age. Hopefully we've stepped in early enough for my daughter, then any damage will be kept to a minimum. As for me, video games were one of the reasons why her mother left me. Video games on my days off from work were my drug of choice. I was working every chance I had, ignoring everything else in life. I loved my job and actually loathed the times that I was scheduled off until I found this online role-playing game. He said he received a rush from playing the game, and there were days that he would forego eating and sleeping for the opportunity to play. There were some days that I would play for 20 hours straight, he wrote. Sleep for 4 hours or less and then sign on again. In those brief times I did sleep, my dreams were filled with the images from the game. He says, I was convinced that my virtual life was good. I was actually shocked, he said, when my wife told me she was ending our relationship. She told me that she felt abandoned and that she knew that our family was not as important to me as my job or this stupid game. Now, when I got that email, I thought, that's a fluke. Nobody plays 20 hours a day playing video games. I'm a dad. We're plunging. We don't have time for, even though with the new plunger, you would have more time. But we don't have time for games. And so I just casually mentioned to a group like this, and afterwards, these wives came up to me. And they said, my husband does the very same thing. I wake up in the middle of the night, and I can't find him. And he's down in the bathroom playing his game. And, and I started thinking, wow, this is a big deal. And it was right around that time that all these things kind of hit at the same time. Like Facebook. I'd just been introduced to Facebook. It's been around for a while now, but it was new at the time. And my brother's like, you got to get on, because you can change the world through Facebook. And I'm like, I don't see how telling people I'm getting a haircut's going to change the world. And he goes, you got to do it, Todd. So I got on, and I found that, a bunch of people wanted to be my friend that I didn't know. And what troubled me was a lot of my old high school friends wanted to be my friends. And I had this little tingle. And I thought, high school was a pretty easy time. Pretty fun time. Home right now is pretty hard, but that's right. It's hard, not a lot of smiles. High school, a lot of smiles. Home, not so many smiles. High school, lots of smiles. And I thought maybe on a weekday, or not a weekday, a weekday, I might choose smiles instead of family. And so I wrote my email list, and it's a bunch of people, and I said, hey, do you know of any marriages that have failed on social media? Hooking up like that. Within 24 hours, I had a list by my desk of over 100 marriages that had failed on Facebook and social media. I'll tell you, I'd be afraid to go into Walmart, as much as I love it, if I knew of 100 marriages that had failed in Walmart. And yet, some of these things we treat so casually. Now, it was at that time that I started talking about this. And as I did, this guy came up to me, and he said, it was right after a talk, and he said, hey, Todd, or Mr. Wilson, I think he called me. He said, that was amazing. He said, and he was maybe 25, good-looking young man, and he said, my wife left me because I was addicted to a game called World of Warcraft. And we talked for a few minutes, and then I said, well, I'll be praying for you. And I headed out the side aisle there. But there was another aisle, further over. And as I was walking, there was another guy walking, keeping track with me. And I thought, he's going to get me at the back. I knew he was. And so we met in the back, and he said, hey, Todd, I'm a pastor. And he said, I've been counseling 5 couples, married couples, whose husbands are all addicted to this game called World of Warcraft. I'm like, I just had this conversation. He said all 5 ended in divorce. And I'm like, wow, this is a big deal. And I know, even as I begin to talk about this, it begins to make you uncomfortable. uncomfortable because you're wondering if you're one of those people. Because here's the deal about this techno beast. This techno beast, I was reading in my Bible, and I came across him in the Bible. Now, if you look up techno beast in your concordance, you will not find him. But if you have your Bible or a technological telephone, you can look up Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs chapter 7, and I will introduce you to the techno beast. Now, this is written by Solomon, and you know, Solomon had he had some great strengths, he had some really downfall weaknesses. And he's talking to his son or his sons. And he says this in verse 1, "My son, keep my words and store my commandments within you." This is kind of lecture mode, you know, and I can see it because this is what I do to my kids. You know, keep my commandments and you will live. Guard my teachings as the apple of your eye. Bind them on the fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister. And insight, you are my relative. And they will keep you from the adulterous woman. Really, that word could be translated imposter. Or maybe even, as we're having this conversation, virtual wife. The wayward woman with her seductive words. And then he kind of leaves the lecture mode, and I believe, because I've got a pretty big imagination, I think he kind of gets that distant look in his eye, and he remembers. Maybe he's looking out the window, and he says, you know, at the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice, and I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men a youth who had no sense. I think he sees himself. You know, and then he goes on to describe, you know, he's going down to the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute with a crafty intent. Interesting. And it goes on. She says, I'm going to kind of speed things up, you know, in verse 14. Today I fulfill my vows. I have food for my fellowship offering at home. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you and have found you. I've covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I perfume my bed, you know, come let us drink deeply of love until morning. The master's gone, you know. And then it says in verse 21, with persuasive words she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her, like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into the noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Now then, my sons, he says, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn into her ways or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave leading down to the chambers of death. And when I read that, I thought, that's the techno beast. Same end result, different disguise. Because really, our enemy is a fisherman. You know, and I mentioned yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that I would go fishing with my dad, you know. Not only would we go trolling, but sometimes we would do something, and I don't know if this is a fishing term, but he called it plugging. Plugging was, I saw a guy down at the beach, and he would throw out a line, and he'd kind of jig it back in, you know. That's what my dad called plugging. So we would go to that weedy spot, and we'd take out our, you know, not very fancy aluminum boat, and he had this aluminum tackle box with the green handle on the top. And we'd get to the spot, and he'd open it up, and I'd reach in there, and I'd pull out the biggest lure that I could find. And I'd snap it on my line. He'd say, no, 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 and he'd start to take it off. He'd say, we're not fishing for those kind of fish. You know, and then he'd reach down in and pull out this long, slender one, and he would twinkle, and he'd say, the guy down at the bait shop said, this is what they're biting on. And he'd snap it on my line, and I'd cast it out there, and then I'd reel it in as fast as I could. You know, just, and it would just skip across the top of the water. And he'd go, no, you're not going to catch any fish that way. And I'm like, you catch the fast ones, you know, the big ones. And he'd say, no, you want to do this. And he'd throw that lure out into the water, and he'd say, now you just give it a little crank, give it a tug, let it drop. Give it a crank, give it a tug, let it drop. Give it a crank, give it a tug, let it drop. Now, he didn't say it this way, but this is how he meant it. He said, what you want to do is you want to make this virtual fish look like a real fish. Because that's how you catch fish. You know, I think that this techno beast you know, knows how to fish. And he's fishing for boys and girls differently. This is why it makes me think that this is the same guy. Is because when you think of a techno beast, you kind of picture this big monster, right? Techno beasts don't start as big monsters. They start like as little guppies, you know? And can you remember when you opened your first technology? I remember like my first email and sending it across the planet, and then it comes back just a few seconds later. Or they would take the screen on a smartphone and you'd swipe it all, and I'm like, this is amazing. But it doesn't stay as a little gadget. It kind of moves to a time waster, where you find yourself just wasting time on it. You're Googling things, like you Google your name, you Google like other than what's the Swahili word for snake, but it doesn't stop there. It goes from time waster to time consumer, where you just start making promises. It's calling you, where you say, okay, I'm going to stop. I mean, John, you talked about putting your phone away. What a great thing. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But, we start making promises. We say, okay, I'm only going to stay on this for 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes. And then you look at your watch and go, wow, I've been on for 45 minutes. Okay, 5 more minutes and I'm off. And you're making those things all the time because it's consuming you. But it doesn't stop there. It grows into a full-blown, I believe, techno beast, or what we just saw in Proverbs chapter 7. It becomes an idol. It becomes a god. And when I say the word idol, you all picture the same things in your mind all at the same time. You picture this big statue, made out of gold or wood or stone or something like that. And the Old Testament was filled with lots of them. And there were a couple really bad ones, Chemosh and Molech. And they were the worst of the worst. They were kind of fashioned in humanistic-looking form. And they would make them kind of like those clay little chimney pots that you put on your back patio. You put a little fire in there and you roast marshmallows. Only they would be hollow. They would look like some kind of human-looking thing where they'd put their arms out like that. And then they would put the sacrifice in their arms when they were to be consumed by the fire. And apparently, the ultimate sacrifice was to take your own children, still alive, and put them on those arms. I mean, honestly, I can't even think about it. It really is just too... And I think, how could anybody do that? I'm assuming you're asking the same question. Really, it makes perfect sense. Because that's what idols and gods demand. The ultimate sacrifice. How can anybody lose their family over a stupid video game? Because that's what idols and gods demand. And so the techno beast, he fishes for boys and girls differently. If you think about boys or men, we are sensual warriors, right? Not sensual in the way you're thinking, but we like our senses tantalized. I mean, if you go and you look at all the pinball machines of the 50s and 60s, they're all loud, and all the shoot 'em up and all that stuff. Our kids, our boys, are warriors inside. Moms I know or grandmothers I know, sometimes you're like, well, I don't want my kids to play with guns. They're made to kill, maim, and destroy. They are. It's in them. They can't stop it. Even where I live, we live in an area with a lot of Amish people. And I remember being out one time, and this Amish buggy pulls in. And it looked like an Amish postcard. It's got this guy, with his little straw hat, and he's getting out his family, and he gets out this little boy who must have been 3, maybe at the very oldest. And he's got little suspenders on and a little Dutch boy haircut, blonde, and no shoes. And he gets him out, and then he takes out a little tricycle, and he puts it down beside the little boy, and the dad walks away. The little boy, he climbs up on the tricycle. He looks to see that his dad is gone, and then he goes, boom, 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 And I thought, that is in him. He has the need for speed, even as an Amish kid. Because that is in your boys. So you can see how the techno beast fishes with a lure for boys, for men. My kids, they love that the swords and knives, and even when I can still see my 4-year-old son like whipping open this razor sharp knife and drawing his thumb across it perpendicular to the blade to test the sharpness, And one time we went to the Liberty Bell, and it was like one of our first national parks we'd ever been in, And we're standing in line, and they put you in a couple different lines, and you got to take all the contents of your pockets and put them in these little dog dishes, like at the airport. And as we're doing that, this park ranger comes up to me and he goes, "Excuse me, sir, but are these your children?" And I'm like, "Yes." "Did they break the Liberty Bell already?" He said, "Can you come with me?" And I'm like, "Go with him." And I see they're standing there with this dog dish piled high with knives. I mean, it looked like we were going to take over the city. And he's like, "Are you from the country?" And I'm like, "Sure." But my kids love those knives. Now, they don't love it's not the knives they love. They like the technology. They'll turn that thing and do this and talk about how many gigabytes go up and how many go down and what they can do with the 4 cameras on the back and all that stuff. My girls don't care. My wife doesn't care. She just wants to know it looks cool in a case. A pink case with lots of glitter. So you can see, again, the draw to men, in nonstop games and nonstop shooting where there are no consequences. The girls and women, they're relational. They're communicators. They want to talk, And in fact, I remember we invited some friends over for dessert, and I asked my wife, I said, "Are they coming over tonight?" She goes, "I don't know. She just emailed me. Can you check?" And so I checked the email, and I'm like going through paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And she goes, "Are they coming?" I'm like, "I have no idea. I can't get there." A guy would have just said, "Sure," and that would have been it. K, one letter. And so you can see the draw, the way the imposter fishes for our girls. Nonstop communication. You go on Instagram and you go from event to event to event to event to event to event, and you just keep on going forever. And so, as I thought about this, and I thought about the techno beast, and I thought his ultimate desire is for our families, I thought, how do we battle this? And even as I thought about it, I thought, it's not that simple. It's just not that simple. And so I drew up my own little battle plan, and again, you can see what you think, and we can talk afterwards. But here's what I wrote. I wrote, number 1, don't minimize it. We used to say, people would say, well, we could tell our kids or our grandkids, well, not everybody's doing it, but now everybody is doing it. Everybody's online. I think my brother is the only person I know who doesn't have a cell phone. And he's a college professor. I don't know if anybody in here doesn't, but he's the only one I know. But everybody else has it. And I've heard parents say to me, especially dads or grandparents say to me, grandfathers, well, we need to have our kids, in technology because they're learning life skills. And I'm like, I'm not sure if we're teaching them life skills or if we're teaching them death skills. Because we're not teaching them to avoid the techno beast, the imposter. And so, number 1, don't minimize it. Number 2, remember the goal. This is parenting. This is also grandparenting. Parenting isn't about right now. It's about later, right? This is not, this little talk we're having, it's not about little boys and little girls who play video games and are on their phones all the time. Or even teenage boys and girls who are on the phones all the time. This is about teenage boys and girls and little boys and girls who grow up to be moms and dads who will be tempted to exchange virtual relationships that are easy and not good, or the other way around. They'll be tempted to exchange real relationships that are easy or that are hard and good for virtual ones that are easy and not good. And that concerns me. I do not want my sons or daughters or even my grandchildren to be swept away in this wave of technology, So it's about remembering the goal. And this is a hard one. It kind of reminds me of The Karate Kid, the movie. Not the new one. I know there's a new one. I won't watch that one just out of principle. But the old one, with Ralph Macchio, when they had real actors, and maybe you remember the story that Ralph he's getting beat up and he wants to learn karate, and he bumps into his building superintendent, Mr. Miyagi, and Mr. Miyagi's going to teach him karate. And so Daniel LaRussa, he shows up, that first day, and he's got this bandana on with an Asian symbol on the front, and he thinks this is going to be, I'm going to bust boards and break people, and he shows up, and Mr. Miyagi meets him with those 2 buckets of suds, remember? And that long line of antique cars. And that's where we get those famous words, remember? Wax on, wax off. That's right. If I'd asked you to quote a Bible verse, you couldn't have done it, but you got that one. Okay, good. The next day, he thinks this is going to be it. I'm going to know it. So the next day, he shows up, and nope, he's got to paint the fence. He's got to paint the fence. He's got to do it different ways. And the third day, he's surely this it, but no, he's doomed to sand the floor with these sanding pads. At the end of it, he's kind of like, I'm sick of this man, and he's taking off his bandana, and his shoulder hurts, and he thinks, I'm not doing this anymore. And Mr. Miyagi looks at Daniel LaRusso, and he goes, Danielson! And he goes, claps his hands, and the music goes, boom. I still get chills when I do that. Boom. And he says, he massages his shoulder, and then Mr. Miyagi kind of gets the karate position. He goes, ah! And he tries to attack him, and Daniel LaRusso, remember, he wax on, wax off, paint fence, sand the floor. He defends himself. He's learned karate. I think that's parenting, grandparenting, that we set down some rules that they don't understand for their own good, so that one day, when they're out on their own, they hear boom, and they go, oh, yeah, that's why my dad and mom, that's why my grandparents did those silly things back then. So look towards the future. Remember the goal. That's number 2. Number 3, here's the hard one. Check your own life. Maybe you're being reeled in by the techno beast right now. Because, this is not a little kid thing. I see our age group that never had it at all. And they're always on it. I mean, I've seen parents and I've seen grandparents where little kids are trying to get their attention. They're going, look at me, and they're twirling, doing these little twirls and the grandparents and the parents are just looking at their phone. There's going to be a day where the kids quit twirling, and we'll have missed it. I never once looked at my dad with one of these in his hand. Now my mom is like doing selfies, which does not seem right, and, how do you get on this internet? That kind of thing. But I never saw my mom with one of those in her hand. So I'm asking you to check your own life. Husbands, if your wife says to you, you're not going to play that stupid game again, are you? You're being reeled in. Ladies, if your husband says to you, can you get off your phone? You're being reeled in. If you hear yourself saying, here we go again, I'm on Facebook again, you're being reeled in. I'll tell you, I'm not a video game guy. I like email. My dad, before me, liked mail. And every day, my dad had a little print shop. Every day, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he would come home. And he was always in a good mood because he was going out to the mailbox. And he had a little tiny print shop, and the checks came in the mail, and orders and things, and he was always so happy. At my house, the mailman doesn't come once a day. He comes every second. And so I'll check it, and there'll be a couple emails. I'm like, oh, good. And I'll answer a few and not a few. And then a couple minutes later, I'll check again, and there's some more. And I might check it, 5 times in a minute. In fact, when our kids were little, I would come home, and I would have a kid over each shoulder, and we'd be going upstairs, and I'd turn on my computer, and I'd be standing there holding the kids, trying to keep them asleep. And my wife would yell down, "You're not on checking your email, are you?" And I'm like, no. Sounds like my kids, doesn't it? Do you know why I wasn't honest? Because I was being reeled in. Check your own life. Here's your only homework. I'm not going to give you any other homework. Husbands and wives, I want you to ask your spouse tonight whether you think you're being reeled in. I know it's going to feel scary for some of you because you're afraid of the answer. But can you do it anyway? If you don't think your husband or your spouse will be honest with you, ask your child or grandchildren. They will be brutally honest with you. But I'll tell you, if you are being reeled in, do something about it. You know, I don't have my phone with me right now, but my phone is not a smartphone. I used to have a smartphone. I loved my smartphone. Had an app in there that I could check all the Walmarts in the country and see if you were allowed to stay there. But you know what? I felt like I didn't like what it was doing to me. I'd be with my family like here at Harvey Cedars, and all of a sudden I'd have this urge to check the weather in the North Pole, you know, and I'm checking. I'm like, it's cold, you know? And I'm thinking, why am I doing this all the time? Or I'd feel those phantom buzzes in my leg. And so I got rid of my smartphone. You know, and it's a pain. But you know, the Bible also says in the New Testament, where Jesus said, if your iPhone causes you to sin, pluck it out. You know what? And people will say, yeah, that's not exactly what it says, Todd. And I'm like, well, you know, eyes were pretty valuable back then. You know, he was going for something really hard. Because some of us say, well, we can't give away our smartphones. Well, we can't give away our eyes either. And he was being extreme. Because it's an extreme thing. And I have husbands who come to me all the time and they say, oh, man, I so admire you for giving away your smartphone, but I would never do it. And again, because you're being reeled in. You know, if God has put that in your heart, you'd be a fool not to. You know, and again, moms, you know, side note, social media, it's poison. It's poison. You never feel good after you're on it. You know, you always feel lesser. Maybe that's a byproduct of this techno beast. Check your own life. Number 4, do what you have to do. Here's the thing, because nowhere in the Bible will you find that you can't text. Nowhere in the Bible will you find that you can't play video games. At least I don't think so. Nathan, you can look. But it's not there. But somehow I believe that God has placed it in the heart of parents to know. You know, parents will come up to me and say, Todd, I feel like my kids are playing too many video games. And I'm like, well, and they'll say, what do you think I should do? And I'm like, I don't care. They're not my kids. And they'll say, yeah, but I think they're playing too many video games. And I'm like, then they're playing too many video games. You know? And so you got to do whatever it takes. I know that in my house, you know, is it okay to put earbuds in your ears? Sure, it's okay. I remember the magic of putting a Walkman on for the very first time and going, wow, this is amazing, you know? Is it okay to have earbuds in all the time? Of course not. We parents can and grandparents can say, hey, can you take your earbuds out? Because I want to be able to talk to you. We were at Disney World, and we were standing in line, and my son's standing right behind me. And I turned around. I was going to say something, and he's on his phone. I said, hey, could you put your phone away? I don't want you on your phone. And he's like, what do you want me to do, just stare at your back? I said, yes. That's exactly what I want you to do, so that when I go, hey, look at that, you know, or when I talk to you, you'll talk to me. My dad was a dad, you know, and at my house, we didn't have a cell phone. We just had a telephone. And when someone would call at my house about 9:30, my dad would answer the phone. And if they were one of my friends, they'd say, is Todd there? And my dad would say, it's too late to be talking to Todd, and he'd hang up. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't tell me nothing. You know what? He didn't have to, because he was a dad. You get to do those things too. You know? So you do whatever you have to do. And I'm going to, and this is like off script here. Some of us are chicken. We're scared of our kids. You know, because when we started, when our kids were playing video games, we let them play. We didn't know anything. By the way, don't beat yourself up, because we didn't know if we give our kids a cell phone, we'd never see their face again. You know? And so we let our kids play video games, and we didn't. So they played too much. And so we decided you can play an hour on Monday, an hour on Wednesday, an hour on Friday. Well, they'd play their hour, and then they'd watch their brothers play their hour. And so, you know, and so there was like 5 hours on Monday. And after a while, we said, okay, we're going to put a little timer out. And if you watch somebody else play their hour, that is your hour. You know, if you don't have your timer, you missed your hour. But then my wife said recently, she was listening to a podcast on screenstrong.com. And she said, Todd, because we only had 2 kids really left, the ones that were here. She said, what do you think about pulling the plug completely? And I'm like, oh. You know, in my head, I imagine World War II, III, IV all combined together. because we had taken summers off where we didn't do technology, and I thought, I don't know, honey. She could, and we talked about it, and we prayed about it, and we did it. And we said to our kids, they had bought some like little things that you can buy for the video game. It was about $100 each. And I said, we'll pay you the $100 that you spent, but we're going to stop. And you know what? I never heard them complain one time. Not one time. Is it possible that our kids, our teenagers, and maybe even our adult children would like to be challenged a little bit? Maybe they feel like they're being reeled in, and they just want someone to say, stop, stop. But we're so afraid that we don't, and the end results are bad. And so do whatever you have to do. And then maybe lastly, the thing about this is that here's how I like to think of this techno beast. I like to think of the old animated show, Disney movie, Beauty and the Beast. My favorite character is Gaston. Gaston is the bad guy. And Gaston is loud. He sings that, I use antlers in all of my decorating, and and at some point he whips up the townsfolk into this mob that he's going to go get the beast. And he says, we've got to do this because the beast will make off with our children in the night. I won't rest until his head is mounted on my wall. And then the chorus to this song goes, kill the beast. And this drum goes, boom, kill the beast. Boom, kill the beast. Boom. You know what? I think we need to hear that in our heads. When your son or daughter or yourself cannot put that phone down. Here, or something like that, kill the beast. But here's the thing about this techno beast. It didn't die in Proverbs chapter 7. It doesn't die now. We whack it down here. We think we got control. And then we look over here and hear it sprouting up in something we've never even imagined before. And there are times, honestly, I've said to my wife, do we have to make a stance on everything? Can't we just let it slide? And the answer for all us parents and grandparents is no. No. Well, there you go. That was my attempt to show you something I was a little apprehensive to show you anyway. But we're going to pray. And again, I don't want anybody to feel guilty because we just didn't know. This is a new world. And things are changing really fast. But your kids, your grandchildren are depending on you. You might have to make some tough decisions. Don't forget your homework. Ask, if you don't have a spouse here, ask somebody you trust, because they probably know for you, and ask, am I being reeled in by the techno beast? And we're going to pray right now. And then at the end when I say, and everybody said, don't say amen, say kill the beast, okay? Just humor me. It's kind of, okay? Don't tell your dad we did this. Okay, let's pray. Father, we just thank you that you have revealed the enemy from the very beginning. And in Proverbs chapter 7, when Solomon was warning his sons about this adulteress, this imposter, I just thank you that you still are revealing that to us, that he is still alive trying to kill our families. I pray that we as parents, that we would never let our guard down. And even though we're tempted sometimes to let things slide, would you help us to make a stand for them? And I'm just going to pray for the moms and dads and the grandparents here right now. If they feel like they're being pulled away or being reeled in, would you give them the courage to do the hard stuff? I don't know what the answer is, but would you make it clear to them? And we do this all in your name, again, because we need your strength. We thank you that everything we need for today in 2022, whether we deal with relationships or whether we deal with something as new as the internet, that you have given us all that we need. And we pray all this in your name. And everybody said, amen.